Sorina, can you wait? Continue. Thank you, Sorina. We haven't asked, but I hope it's fine. We are recording this meeting because a lot of people wanted to join us and they couldn't, and they were asking about the recording. So I hope it's okay with everybody. And I was trying to tell you how we ended up doing these meetings. This is the first meeting in a series, we hope. And it's my colleague Sorina's idea. I cannot see her right now, but oh yes, she's there. Hi, Sorina.
I'm here, hi.
Good. It's because we have been working for many years with the international community in media education, and during all this time we have met so many great people working in the field, and we learned a lot from them, and we got inspired, and we said we should share all this with you, the community. In the beginning, we were thinking to do this for our community in Romania, but then we decided it would be nicer to have even more people. So I'm glad to say that people all over the world registered for this meeting, and I hope everybody can make it. And I'm really happy to host you all. We are, me and my colleague and Renee. So I'm Nicoleta Fotiade, and I'm a media literacy educator. Although I started as a journalist and as a media researcher, which helped a lot in my work as a media literacy educator. And today's topic is propaganda and disinformation. And what we will try to do, we'll try to clarify, to understand why it is important to teach about propaganda in schools and in any other teaching environment. And especially, I would be very curious to find out what are the challenges that teachers may face while teaching about propaganda and disinformation. For instance, I would be interested to know what are the teachers' fears and expectations, and what is the stress before, and do the teachers have self-doubt before they go teaching about propaganda? Because let's face it, it's a sensitive topic, and it can raise a lot of challenges for the teachers in his interaction or her interaction with the students. Is there a difference between teaching about propaganda and teaching about disinformation? So I will discuss all this with my super lovely guest today, Professor Renee Hobbs. Hi, Renee. And thank you for joining us today for our first meeting, for our first media literacy talk today. Renee, you are an internationally recognized authority on digital and media literacy education. And in your position as founder and director of the Media Education Lab at the University of Rhode Island, you have been involved in countless media literacy actions with really great results for our community of media educators. And we thank for that, because you've been a constant source for inspiration. You are also the author of 12 books and more than 150 scholarly articles in digital and media literacy education. I only have this book with me. Unfortunately, I haven't received the last one, the last book that was
on the way.
You have it.
And your copy is coming.
Great. Cannot wait to read it. So your recent book I was talking about is the award-winning book Mind Over Media: Propaganda Education for Digital Age, that I recommend because I have been working in a project of 2 years project, I think it was, in Mind Over Media with Renee, and it was such a really, I think we did a great job. And Renee, I have to say this, we are also very proud that you are an honorary board member of Mediawise Society, a position from which you have helped us a lot with guidance and advice. So we thank you for that as well. As I was saying, talking to Renee about media education has always been so mind-opening and challenging at the same time. And we love talking to Renee, especially about these sensitive issues that appears many times when we teach media education. I will tell you this at the beginning. While we talk, if you remember any of this challenging situation in which you found yourself, do let us know in the chat, and we will try to introduce you in our discussion. We will have also 1 or 2 polls for you to answer, and yeah, hopefully you will enjoy our talk today. So I will go straight to the point, Renee. Why should we teach about propaganda? Is it because of the Russian propaganda?
Why should we teach about propaganda? The same reason that we teach media literacy, the same 4 reasons that we care about media literacy are the same 4 reasons why we should teach about propaganda. So one reason that motivates many people to teach media literacy is this idea of the expanded conceptualization of literacy, right? That literacy is more than just the process of deciphering the little black squiggles on the white page, that symbols come in many different forms, and symbols are very powerful, right? Symbols are how we share meaning. So propaganda genres are important movers of social action. And so if we're helping people to be literate in a digital age, we teach about all the genres that are meaningful. So that's one reason. Another reason is the protection from harm argument, right? So many people are drawn to media literacy because of its capacity to protect people from harmful media, whether this is stereotypes about immigrants and refugees, whether this is messages that trivialize human sexuality or that demonize human sexuality, whether these are stereotypes about gender, whether these are messages that promote irresponsible social communication, right? In terms of people's online behavior and being mean. And so however you define harm, right? And there are so many ways to understand this. Being addicted to video games can be understood as a harm, right? So why study propaganda? Because propaganda can be harmful, and media literacy can be a way to protect people from that harm. Then the third reason for why we teach about media literacy, why we think it's important, is that media literacy provides a critique, commentary on institutional power. Now, of course, if you're thinking about propaganda, it's very relevant to think about why being able to recognize, critique, and comment on the institutional power of state-sponsored propaganda, corporate-sponsored propaganda, and propaganda disseminated by activists and artists and ordinary people. So commenting and critiquing on the different kinds of institutional power, that's a reason for doing media literacy. And then, of course, fourth on my list, but not at all the least, not the least of them, is the idea that media literacy is a necessary competence for citizens in democratic societies, right? So if self-governance means making good decisions about civic life, then one reason for media literacy's importance is to be better equipped at making those decisions about civic life. And in this sense, propaganda is super relevant because propaganda is the main mechanism by which elections get enacted, right? Election propaganda is how we do democracy, right? It's a spin, it's a contest, a duel of interpretations, right? Which is it? Is it that the immigrants are taking over Germany and they need to be gotten out at any cost? Well, that's what the AfD says, right? Or is it that we need to be, we need to provide Syrian refugees with the safe spaces where they can recover their lives after the trauma of the Civil War? Well, the dual of interpretation is enacted through propaganda. And so to be a citizen in a democracy means to be able to interpret, analyze, and make sense of the multiple interpretations about social reality that are swirling all around. So I wonder for our participants, if you had to rank order these 4 reasons why, which one would be at the very top of your list? And Nicoleta, I'm going to ask you the same question. Now, they're all important, right? So let me remind you, expand the concept of literacy. That's number 1. Number 2 is protect from harmful media. Number 3 is critique institutional power. And number 4 is do democracy. Which of those goes to the top of your list? They're all important, but one of them is most motivating for you. Let's see your answers up in the chat.
So I see number 4.
Good answers coming through. And now we'd like to hear your reasons. So yes, thanks for saying number 4, but give me a phrase that gives your reason why that's at the top of your list.
And number 2, protection from harm.
Yeah. Aha. Karen Markin says do democracy because it underlies the others. Great point, Karen. Yep. So there you go. So we do see that these are related to each other, but we know that educators, for example, will make different choices in the classroom depending on which of these motives comes first, right? So teachers who are teaching native tongue instruction, they are drawn to the concept of literacy, right? Yeah. That is their job.
I would have said number 1. I would have said number 1.
Why? Why, Nicoleta?
Because I think the other 3 are encompassed in number 1, and probably because I see it as an educator, and well, when you teach to expand competencies, as you said earlier, you teach and you have in mind different knowledge, different skills, right? So protection from harm to me is implicit. I don't usually teach to protect against harmful media and so on. I teach to sort of offer my students the skills and the knowledge to understand and to critically comment, as you said, and to critically create new information to participate in the media environment. So, but I wanted to go back a little bit to propaganda. And when we hear the word propaganda here in Romania and Eastern Europe, actually, the word has of course, a negative connotation, a very political dimension, and people are very surprised to find out that actually we are not teaching them to get protected from negative propaganda, but to understand propaganda as a form of communication. So how do we teach about propaganda, Renee?
Yeah, so such a great place to start. And of course, I'm going to put the link to an article I wrote just recently in the Harvard Kennedy School's Misinformation Review. Neil Postman, who is definitely identified as a grandfather of media literacy, right? With his famous book from the 1980s entitled Amusing Ourselves to Death. Yes, so Neil Postman made the argument that when television tries to do serious subjects like politics, religion, entertainment, and news, it really can have disastrous effects on the culture. And he once called propaganda a most mischievous word. He described it as a snarl word, right? A word whose connotation is automatically stops critical thinking. right?
Right.
Because it's so emotionally loaded. And of course, for most people around the world, after the Holocaust, the word propaganda achieved this very, very negative impact. Of course, I started my interest in this topic when I realized that most of my university students thought that propaganda was something that happened in 20th century Germany, and that it was not an issue. It was a historical topic.
Right.
Oh my God, how far from the truth as
You just
propaganda.
answered my next question. How did you started teaching about propaganda?
Yeah, so how to solve this problem that propaganda is treated as a snarl word? Well, I think Postman's idea of it being mischievous is really interesting, right? So as I look back in the history of the pedagogy of teaching about propaganda, because educators have taught about propaganda for most of the 20th century, and there was a great big movement in the 1930s in the United States to teach about propaganda, and that's true in other countries as well, because the philosophers who studied the power of language recognize that by your choice of words, you construct reality, right? And in doing so, your vision, your construction of reality, shaped by the adjectives, the verbs, the prepositions, the nouns that you use, that has the power to influence public opinion. So this idea has been well understood since the 1920s, right? And
by whom? Well, understood by whom?
By intellectuals, right? And by people who use media, right? So Walter Lippmann's very famous book in 1921, Public Opinion, right? As he's analyzing the journalism of the 20s, he says, wow, journalists are shaping reality in ways that could function as propaganda.
Actually defining stereotyping in that book, isn't it?
Exactly, that's right. Stereotypes are the pictures of the world we hold in our heads. So I actually thought that teaching about propaganda was a great way to teach about the whole media studies field in general, right? Because it encompasses so much. But I also had a more pragmatic goal, which is I wanted people to sort of own their own identity as propagandists.
Right, very important.
Right, yeah, because I think if we understand that through language, we shape the world, then that's not something they do. That's something we do, right?
And
by every choice we make in our language.
And the perception is they are doing this to us. Bless you.
Thank you.
It's rarely a self-reflection process when we say, what am I doing? Do I do something as well to contribute?
Yeah, and so the setting aside the sort of negative connotation and embracing the possibility that there might be something we call beneficial propaganda, right? Messages transmitted to influence the behavior of a wide audience that might be designed intentionally for social good, right? Opening up our minds to the idea that a public service announcement that says wear a mask or get a vaccine is a form of propaganda changes then the way you teach about propaganda, because now we can have genuine inquiry. What do you perceive to be beneficial and why? Right. What do you perceive to be harmful and why? Could a message be designed for a beneficial purpose in the mind of the author that has a disastrous impact for a receiver? Well, of course, right? And so the study of propaganda gets much more interesting when we stop demonizing it and start thinking about it as one of the persuasive genres that deserves attention. And so I like to say that propaganda sits at the intersection of information, persuasion, and entertainment.
Right.
Right. And so that really starting to look at how entertainment can function as propaganda is also an area of study that is very engaging for students, very useful for preparing people for the media choices that they're making in their life.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I pause you a little bit to ask our audience whether they teach about propaganda, and we have a poll here. So if you could please, just to have an image of our audience and how many of you are actually teaching about propaganda in a form or another.
Oh, I love Zoom polls. Karen Markin asks in the chat, have you looked at TikTok in this regard? And of course, yes, TikTok is a fascinating genre of expression and communication that has plenty.
Can people see my poll? Is there? Because I can't see answers. Perhaps
I can. Yes, I can see the answers.
Oh, okay. So you have to show us the answers afterwards, Sorina, because you are the host, the main host. That's right. I forgot. I'm just co-host. So Sorina, we will wait for your.
Yeah, 20 people out of 26 have already voted. Shall I show you with share screen or how?
No, you just end poll and you can.
Okay.
You can share it with us. There will be a button.
Share results.
Yes.
Wow, what a cool result. So we have people who do teach propaganda, people who don't. It's complicated because we did say we would talk about the challenges of teaching propaganda. Should we talk about that now?
Oh yeah, sure, of course. Go ahead. I was just because I didn't see the result.
I would like to hear from you, actually, Nicoleta, about what are the challenges of teaching about propaganda in Eastern Europe?
Well, well, the first challenge is this: propaganda has a very negative connotation, and of course, the communist period had its take on this. And we are very close to Russia, and people tend to think about propaganda in terms of Russian propaganda, so a very unidirectional take on propaganda. And it is a challenge when you start talking about it, but once you try to critically analyze, to define together the propaganda as a form of communication, when we look at the techniques used, and when we look where we can find different forms of propaganda, people understand really easy, and then they sort of easily drop the idea that propaganda is only a negative term. But what I would say is a very difficult situation is when my own convictions are different from my students. That is a very challenging situation, because I'm trying not to, I mean, my job as a teacher is not to convince people of anything. Or I try to convince them to change a bit the attitude and ask more questions. Yes, that I do. But I'm not trying to convince them of my values or my convictions. So when we talk about issues like vaccination or LGBTQ or racism, or then you know, the atmosphere, sorry, hits up. And it's very challenging to stay neutral and to see the learning objective of that situation, and to stay on track, not to sort of influence very much the discussion and the analysis with my own values and beliefs.
Yeah, that is a really great challenge. And in my book, I look at how teachers manage the way they enact their ideologies. And there's the scholarly literature on this is absolutely fascinating. I really recommend the work of Diana Hess Hess. She's done the best work on teaching controversial topics in the elementary and secondary classroom, and done a really great job looking at what do teachers do when controversial topics come up. Now, controversial topics can come up in history, right? For topics that have been controversial for 1,000 years, right? But topics that are more current, like you described, kind of raise the most heat, right? Raise the most emotional response in the classroom. And Hess points out that there are some times when the morally right thing for a teacher to do is to forcefully express his or her own ideology. Right. Sometimes that is absolutely essential, and that the right thing to do is to explain, I'm in favor of X for reasons Y, I have a firm belief in this, and I want you to know it. Other times, educators are wise to withhold their, or to withhold their ideological stances. And teachers, as teachers gain more experience in the classroom, they learn how and when and why to choose to withhold an ideological perspective at one point in time, reveal it at another point of time on some topics, but not others. And these are professional decisions, right? But they are nuanced by our humanity.
Exactly.
Right? So we don't want to have any rules that tell teachers, well, like we've got one going on in our country right now. We've got state governments making rules that you can't teach about critical race theory in the classroom. What?
What critical race theory?
Yes.
Do you want me to just put these in the closet, or did you need some?
So there's
We have somebody.
Screen cleans? Yeah, I got you. I've got all these.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Marina, you can mute all.
Thank you very much.
And now I lost my idea.
No, you're good. You're good. Yeah. So this idea of how teachers present their ideologies is a really, really important topic. I spend a whole chapter on it. It's super important. And it's also related to a very interesting and sticky situation. Teaching about propaganda requires a great amount of self-awareness on the part of the instructor, because truthfully, education can function as propaganda. We have a special word for this in English. We use the term indoctrination.
Yeah.
Do you use this in Romanian as well?
Yeah, indoctrinare.
To refer to when educators push an ideology that must be accepted, cannot be questioned, right?
Right.
So when teachers start to look around, when teachers become self-aware about teaching propaganda, they start to notice aspects of educational indoctrination all around them that they might not have noticed before. For instance, it's very typical for American educators, when they first start learning about teaching about propaganda, to become aware that American students are required each day to stand, place their hand over their heart, and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As you can see, I have memorized that very well from 12 years of saying it every single day. And never once during those 12 years did we question why we did that or what it meant. Right.
Renee, I just wanted to ask everybody if you do have examples of such challenging situation in the classroom, please write them down on chat, and Renee will try to answer to them. About this self-reflection process that a teacher has to take to do before it goes in the classroom, and this is a long-term process, it's not ending ever. And my question is, wouldn't be a risk for teachers to, as you said, the teacher becomes more aware about the indoctrination and so on, wouldn't be this risk to become too relative in thinking, like, being not so sure about anything that the teacher teaches in the classroom?
Oh, this is a great observation. So what you're talking about, I put under the category of, you use the word relative, right? This idea that maybe as teachers gain more self-reflection on this topic, they get less comfortable making claims of about knowledge,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
More aware how knowledge is constructed. And that basically is a big idea in media literacy. It's about media literacy epistemology, media literacy as a way to understand the nature of knowledge. And this is such a great topic. And I'm going to link it up to Ricardo's really great observation about there are some people who think that the information being promoted about vaccines is a form of propaganda, right? So we're seeing a lot of discourse right now about whose agendas are being revealed. And in my book, I have a chapter on science propaganda, because what is really interesting, and we've known for 100, 200 years, really, maybe since the Enlightenment even, really, that scientific knowledge is built on consensus, right? The world was flat, and the world was flat, and the world was flat until it wasn't, right? Right. Until Galileo stood up and said, the earth is round. So scientific knowledge is constructed by consensus. And that consensus shifts with new knowledge. So all this, no offense, all this bullshit about facts being like so certain and secure, it's like, that is crazy. Facts are not that certain and secure. Facts are constructed by people, right? Who are using evidence available to them at the moment. And when the evidence changes, the fact changes.
Wow,
right?
wow, wait. This is in this vaccination and COVID times, these facts are not certain and secure. It's really, wow. I agree with you. But would you say it would make people feel very uncomfortable?
Well, and so this is a great observation, Nicoleta, because remember, we haven't really defined those 4 techniques of propaganda, that how to spot propaganda. We recognize propaganda by its signatures, right. Moves, rhetorical moves, right? Which the Greeks wrote about 3,000 years ago, right? But here they are. Propaganda works to change attitudes and behaviors by arousing strong emotions, bypassing the head and going straight for the heart. Propaganda works because it simplifies complexity. It reduces complexity to the essence. And that is very attractive to us system 1 thinkers, like Daniel Kahneman said, right? We want to make a fast decision. Complexity just slows us down. So simplify information, people make fast decisions. Number 3, propaganda is easily recognizable because of how it taps into fundamental human needs, right? Our deepest, most sacred values. Propaganda uses our own values and beliefs so we persuade ourselves, right? Because our deepest values have been activated, and then propaganda attacks opponents, right? So that simplify ideas point is a really interesting one. And I think part of my reason why media literacy continues to fascinate me after 30 years of studying how teachers in elementary school and middle school and high school and university, how they try to build these competencies, is because media literacy expands people's tolerance for complexity, right? Makes people more comfortable with not knowing, makes people more intellectually curious and want to know, but avoids a simple maxims, slogans, aphorisms, resists that tendency and wants people to wrestle with the gray areas.
So the more media literate, the more comfortable with the idea that facts are not as secure and that there is a consensus, scientific consensus, and so on.
Yeah,
Right.
facts are constructed by humans. Now you still have to do, you shouldn't throw up your hands and go, oh, I can't trust anything. That would not be the right response. You
Right.
still have to make a decision who and what you decide to trust, but you're aware that you're making that decision.
Exactly. Yes.
Right? You're making that decision, and your decision might be different from someone else. So this also increases tolerance, because I'm aware that I'm making a decision based on a set of judgments I'm making about who to trust. Someone else might be making those judgments based on something else. Ricardo, I saw your hand was raised. Do you have a comment or a question?
I have a question. Hi. Many thanks for inviting me, Nico, and nice to meet you, Renee. I'm not an educator, so I'm coming from a different line of business, but I'm clearly interested for your discussion. So I have a question. If some people would start challenging the force of gravity, saying it does not exist, you can try, jump outside the window, you will see by yourself. So what society or the institution should do? They should prohibit it, because clearly that would kill people. So there are facts that are undeniable, and we should promote those facts as science. I do not know.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. Yeah, so when it comes to the laws of gravity, I am completely with you. And also, even more controversial than that, I am with you on the understanding that humans put carbon into the atmosphere, and that causes climate change. This is a fact, right? And so I am with you on that. And I think we should make policies and laws that are aligned with that understanding, right? Even though we know that it is a complicated, weather is complicated, right? And there are many variables that influence weather that we don't yet understand. And scientists, one of the things that's really interesting is scientific expertise is such an interesting topic. They say that, you know, as a reader of science news, I have no ability to judge who the expert is. Is it you, Ricardo? Here you are. You are identified in the newspaper as an expert. Do I believe you are an expert? Turns out that I have to trust experts. And I trust experts when I get in an airplane and I think it's going to fly. I trust experts when I drive on a highway and I come home safely, right? So trusting experts is a great thing. And what we have right now is a really interesting phenomenon where who an expert is contested, because anyone who has a blog can be an expert, right?
Yeah. But excuse me, just a last comment, but I have the impression that the discussion is exactly this nowadays. Populism all over the world is saying, expert, we do not need expert. Experts are part of a conspiracy, I do not know, plan, and therefore we need to whatever.
Yeah.
It's a small but large part of the population. We're talking about more than 10%, more or less.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm actually fascinated that in my book, I talk about how there are two forms of authority that people use to decide what to believe. One is expertise. You have a specialized knowledge, right? And that specialized knowledge makes you more trustworthy. But we have another form of authority that's rising in the culture. I call it authenticity, right? It is your character, your ethos, your way of being seems like relatable, like you seem similar to me. And so people now, as the internet has enabled people without authority, without expertise to rise by their relatability, by their performance, right? By how charming they are, right? And not how smart they are, not how
on
much
social media.
Exactly. So that now we have an imbalance Whereas where expertise is distrusted, in part because of corruption, and let's own up to that, right? Experts have fucked themselves, no offense. They have messed up themselves because they have succumbed to corruption. And people sometimes have a right to distrust experts who are corrupt. Okay, because they're human beings, just like everybody. So they've elevated charismatic personalities like, I can think of a few in your country, in my country, and around the world. They've elevated charismatic personalities as more believable because of their distrust for corrupt experts. And we in the education field and media literacy wants to make sure we like restore.
I would call them narcissistic personalities. There is this great lady, I forgot her name. She's a psychanalyst, and she did this research. She's researching narcissism a lot for many years, and it seems that narcissist personalities in our age of media, social media and so on, have much more success in their field of work and so on than the others. I mean, expertise is not, as you said, it's not as important as being able to go online and say things and, attract likes and followers.
Yes, and such personalities usually have a very good command of how to deploy propaganda using those 4 techniques that we talked about.
I've already put a link to the techniques on the platform, learning platform Mind Over Media, which is a collaborative platform in I don't remember how many languages, almost 10 languages perhaps, that you could have a look at and even use in your work. I wanted to change a little bit the angle. Us media educators, we like very much this topic of gender representation. And while you're talking about appearance and charisma, gender representation and gender stereotyping is very much present in propaganda messages. And I was thinking we could have a look at some example of a propaganda message, and perhaps you would tell us, first of all, if you think this is propaganda, why it is propaganda, and then we can discuss even further. I will, Sorina, could you please share your screen and show us? This is an ad.
Is it Killing Us Softly?
Hmm?
Is it the Killing Us Softly?
No, it's Adelina Pestrițu.
Okay, just a second.
Do you have it? This is a Romanian ad for a online platform that sells clothing.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, I will let you watch it, and then I will translate for non-Romanian speakers the comment.
Poți fi zeița care se ivește în mijlocul muritorilor de rând. Poți fi imposibilul care își creează drum către posibil. Sau filmul în care toți ar vrea să joace, dar nu primesc niciodată vreun rol. Și poți fi și palma dată dobitocului care crede că strada e coșul lui de gunoi. Iar asta nu te costă nimic. Fashion Days.
So the motto of this ad is, it's all about good taste and about common sense. And I will tell you quickly what the voiceover said. You can be the goddess who appears in the midst of mere mortals. You can be the impossible that makes its way towards the possible, or the movie in which everyone wants to act but never gets a part. And you can be the slap given to the animal who thinks the street is his trash can, and that doesn't cost you anything.
Wow.
We are not discussing now taste or how, if you will like it or not. And I lost you. I can't see you any longer.
No, so one of the things I really like about this is it gives us the opportunity to talk about advertising as propaganda.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So advertising can function, doesn't always function as propaganda, but advertising can function as propaganda. And here we can see that very clearly. Boy, does it activate strong emotion, because I felt lust. Okay, just saying. So yes, it activated strong emotion and it appealed to people's deepest hopes, fears, and dreams. The identity statements that you just described, right, are identity statements about who you want to be in the world, right? What kind of social power you crave and what kind of social responsibility you want to claim. I think it's interesting how it combines traditional stereotypical representations of female beauty with a kind of feminist agenda there at the end, linked to, I don't know, environment.
Yeah. Can a woman be both attractive and environmentally conscious, civically? Can she? But by the way, Renee, does the ad challenge the brainless beauty stereotype? Do you think?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It links the possession of status objects to awareness of gender power relations and of female agency and of environmental consciousness. So yes, this is femvertising, exploiting feminism for capitalistic purposes.
Let's make a short intertextuality exercise and think of me in a very sporty outfit, no makeup, barely awake. It's morning, doing what Adelina did in the ad. Do you think the ad would sell?
It is really interesting how this ad is targeting women, right? But men will watch it.
No, I think it's targeting both men and women, in my opinion.
Ah,
What does the ad try to sell, actually?
those status objects that are named with brands. So you must have the brand name, right? It must be not just sunglasses, but it must be whatever the brand name is, right?
Exactly.
So branding and identity, actually, that's a really great way to describe how advertising functions as propaganda. You link the product to a set of feelings, right? So when you think of those products, you think of this empowered female, right? And that connecting the product to feelings, that's what advertising does to move merchandise.
Right, right.
But people should learn about that long before they get to high school. And what I want to know is, why don't elementary school teachers teach about advertising in the elementary grades? Why are they afraid? Why are they afraid to teach about advertising in the elementary grades?
That would be a very good research question, along many others. But how would you approach this material in the classroom, for instance, with elementary school?
I don't know if I would use this material in the classroom.
Okay.
I do think that teachers make really important strategic decisions about what content to display. And that's something I also write about in the book, right? Because teachers have to be careful to not create opportunities for I'm using this for media literacy purposes, but it could function as propaganda, right? Because remember, I can't control people's interpretations. So I tell a story in the book about a woman who used a really interesting segment from Al Jazeera News on labor unions in her school district in Minnesota. And she was teaching about labor unions. She used this piece. It happened to be a very funny piece, like a kind of, I don't want to say comedy journalism, but a little tongue-in-cheek-ish look at right to work laws and the decline of the labor union movement in the United States. And the kid went home and said, wah, 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 and the parent complained, the teacher is indoctrinating my kids to like unions, and unions are terrible. And this piece was very unbalanced, and it was critical of our state's right to work law, which is something that the parent was very upset about. And in this case, the teacher was supported by her supervisors, who said she had a right to use that clip if she wanted to, but teachers have to be sensitive to how their choices could be misinterpreted by young learners. And so I wouldn't probably use this clip.
Why not?
I actually think that arousing lust in a classroom, a mixed gender classroom, isn't really a great thing. There's enough lust happening already among students without me trying to up the emotional arousal.
But shouldn't we expose the students in an environment where we can critically analyze this stuff that is everywhere around them?
Well, I think this is a personal choice on the part of a teacher.
Okay.
Maybe there are people in this room who would feel it important to do that. I can think of some context where it might be appropriate, but
it could be a material used in a lesson about objectification of women in the media. And I had another example to show it to you. We still have some time. This is a example of propaganda that is activism type of propaganda, and it actually, I found it on. I will try to share my screen for you. It's 5 minutes long, but we won't look it for 5 minutes. We will have a look only for a few minutes. 1 second, please. Let me share. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Good. Okay, so this is a talk by Jean Kilburn about advertising image of women. Oh, so what's this? What happened?
It was the end of the video, and now you need to.
Okay, sorry. Merci.
Sometimes people say to me, "You've been talking about this for 40 years. Have things gotten any better?" And actually, I have to say, really, they've gotten worse. Ads sell more than products. They sell values, they sell images, they sell concepts of love and sexuality, of success, and perhaps most important, of normalcy. To a great extent, they tell us who we are and who we should be. Well, what does advertising tell us about women? It tells us, as it always has, that what's most important is how we look. So the first thing the advertisers do is surround us with the image of ideal female beauty. Women learn from a very early age that we must spend enormous amounts of time, energy, and above all, money, striving to achieve this look and feeling ashamed and guilty when we fail. And failure is inevitable because the ideal is based on absolute flawlessness. She never has any lines or wrinkles. She certainly has no scars or blemishes. Indeed, she has no pores. And the most important aspect of this flawlessness is that it cannot be achieved. No one looks like this, including her. And this is the truth. No one looks like this. The supermodel Cindy Crawford once said, "I wish I looked like Cindy Crawford." She doesn't, she couldn't, because this is a look that's been created for years through airbrushing and cosmetics, but these days it's done through the magic of computer retouching. Keira Knightley is given a bigger bust. Jessica Alba is made smaller. Kelly Clarkson, well, this isn't interesting. It says slim down your way, but she in fact slimmed down the Photoshop way. You almost never see a photograph of a woman considered beautiful that hasn't been photoshopped. We all grow up in a culture in which women's bodies are constantly turned into things, into objects. Here she's become the bottle of Michelob. In this ad, she becomes part of a video game. And this is everywhere, in all kinds of advertising. Women's bodies turned into things, into objects. Now, of course, this affects female self-esteem. It also does something even more insidious. It creates a climate in which there's widespread violence.
The material goes to the idea that this type of objectification sort of promotes violence, legitimates violence against women. So Renee, would you use this material in the classroom?
Wow, what a complicated question to ask at the very end of this seminar. I have known Jean Kilbourne for 40 years. And I stopped using Killing Us Softly in the 1990s because I found it was not effective for advancing media literacy competencies. I think advocacy documentaries like the work that's produced by the Media Education Foundation and other works like this, I think they have a place. They model the practice of critical analysis, right? So here we have an expert who is offering an interpretation of media messages, and modeling that practice can be very useful to see, for students to see what an expert analysis looks like, right? But what I've found in my own practice and why I stopped using this kind of documentary is that my students, they didn't use it, they didn't treat it like a model of a critical analysis. They treated it like a set of values to be accepted and believed.
Exactly,
right?
It's very unidirectional.
Yeah, so it did function as shaping students' thought rather than activating critical thinking. So I found it more useful to use other pedagogies where students had to do the work of critically analyzing, right? Students were the ones who had to produce their critical analysis, and that was more effective. I think sometimes the use of these kinds of advocacy documentaries can contribute to the perception that media literacy is fundamentally persuasive and or has its own ideological agenda. And I think that is really important for us to push back against, because but teachers make choices in the classroom. And so for some teachers, this is an important choice, and I can respect teachers who choose to use this kind of material in the classroom, even if it's not the approach that I would use myself.
Actually, I just put the link to the Mind Over Media website where people voted this propaganda message. And actually, you can see that on the scale from beneficial to harmful, 42% of the votes went to extremely harmful. So most probably, yeah, the opinion went towards what you just said.
So advocacy documentaries can be perceived as beneficial or harmful because propaganda is in the eye of the beholder. And this is really important to underline, right? Jean Kilbourne didn't intend to create propaganda. She intended to create an educational documentary to reveal the way in which sexist attitudes are presented in advertising, to make people see that afresh. That was her goal. But it could be seen as propaganda, right, by some people, because propaganda is an interpretation that the beholder makes, right? And I feel like in some ways, becoming more self-aware of how you define propaganda, how you see propaganda in your world, that creates all kinds of rich conversations that help build social consensus too, right? Help us come to an agreement, right?
Yeah. I would like to ask our participants if there are any questions or comments you would like to make. We have some more time left, so just pop in and give us your
Nicoleta, there's one story I want to share before I go that I hope will be useful. Some teachers have asked me, Renee, so if everybody can be a propagandist, should I have my students create propaganda?
Right. That's a good
Should they make propaganda? Should they create their own propaganda as a way to learn about how to be socially responsible propagandist, right? Because I think that is an important thing to learn. And what in researching this topic and talking to hundreds of teachers who are exploring this topic, I've learned that teachers do feel that they need to set limits. I myself felt the need to set limits when I asked my university students to create propaganda. And so I required them to go to a list of topics and choose from this list of topics. And this was my way to make sure that my students wouldn't create dangerous, harmful propaganda. Other teachers find ways to steer students to avoid making choices that are socially irresponsible. Like this wonderful art teacher in Massachusetts, she asked her students to create visual art using lithography, you know, the mass cutting lithography. And when one student proposed doing something about the propaganda was, the student wanted to create was, the Confederate flag is just a symbol. And it has no real harmful meaning. It's just a symbol. And the teacher said to the student, well, you could make that propaganda, but I won't be able to put it up on the wall in the hallway. Right? Because I could get fired. And this really created a great conversation between the student and the teacher about how propaganda is understood differently. Right? So I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for us to teach about propaganda by having students make propaganda, but we have to be okay with drawing the lines
right
around how that conversation occurs.
Context, it's very important. So this story also show us that in terms of challenges that the teacher encounters is also the external factors that come into play, like the institutions, the parents, and so on, that they have to keep in mind. And for instance, in Romania, gender identity is a sensitive issue to discuss in the classroom, and the teacher who may try to do that may have a lot of trouble, not only from the ministry, but also from the parents of the children. So it's an ongoing process. Well, Renee, I think, oh, we have a question. I was going to, from Pam. What would be your top 3 resources for developing media literacy skills for middle school grades age 11 to 14, Renee, other than Mind Over Media?
Yeah, of course, the common sense resources are terrific for middle school
Common sense, yeah.
learners. And of course, the news literacy stuff is great too. So I'd put those on my list. Great.
Well, I think we are at the end of our time. I think it's 1 hour already. I would like to just end with this simple question that probably you won't have an answer, but I will just ask: why aren't this topic present in the school curriculum?
That is a very complicated question. And you and I both know that building a coalition of educators who have the confidence and the courage and the tenacity and the will to bring these skills to young people is part of what you're doing here by this very gathering, right? So we are not at the tipping point yet. Once 30% of educators around the world realize that this is a fundamental aspect of education, It doesn't matter whether the ministries have the curriculum. It doesn't matter whether the bureaucracies agree. Once teachers have the will to do this, it'll happen. And so we are building that movement of people all around the world who see this as a vital aspect of education. And I think we're getting close to the tipping point. So I think it's ahead of us, Nicoleta, but it's definitely an achievable goal. And thanks to gatherings like this, this is the leadership cadre here in this room, right? Committed to making it happen. So if you want it to happen, you will work to make it happen. So let's do it.
Let's hope so. Thank you so much, Renee, for being with us today. We hope we will do this more often. And thank you, all of you who participated in our discussion. I hope it was interesting and inspiring for you. And do let us know how you felt on our webpage or Facebook page or whatever. Write to us on email. We'll be so glad to hear your feedback. Ciao.